Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We have been discussing the three founding heroes of Pakistan from Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy's book, Pakistan, Origins, Identity and Future. We have discussed Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and Allama Iqbal, and now we discuss the third founding hero, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the Quaid-e-Azam. Now here is a man with 200 Savile Row tailored suits and silk ties. It is said he never repeated one again, so he never wore the same tie again. A lifestyle of an upper class English gentleman, including his clipped English accent. A very high income earned entirely from his roaringly successful legal practice. So, a technocrat amidst fellow feudal lords. 3 homes, one in the poshest area of London, where he kept 2 cooks, one Indian and one Irish, and had an English chauffeur who drove his Bentley. 1 home in Malabar Hills in Bombay and one on Aurangzeb Road in Delhi, which was designed by Edwin Lutyens, a renowned architect of his period. So the question really arises that how did a man like that come to become a revered and highly loved Quaid-e-Azam, the great leader of a highly conservative Muslims of South Asia, majority of whom were living in the 18th and 19th century? So why don't we ask that question from Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy?
Why do you ask difficult questions of me? Actually, it's even stranger than that, because Jinnah wanted to be a professional actor and act out Shakespearean dramas. And then at one point he wanted to run for the Tories. And
you mean run an election in the UK?
Yes.
For the Tory party?
Yes, yes. But of course, things happen in life. When he went back to India, he found he was in great demand, both as a lawyer, but also because lawyers were ideally positioned to be leaders as well. And the popularity he found was because the Muslims were in a desperate state, which we've talked about. They were seeing that there was little representation that they could make effectively because there was so few amongst them who could speak English and be able to communicate with the British at that time. And Jinnah had certainly a lot of charisma, and there were personal qualities that endeared him to a lot of people. He was absolutely straight, no under the table dealings, and he was reputedly a man of very high integrity. So when he began his political career the Muslim League came into existence, he was already a person with a command of the people around him. His goal, which he achieved, was to become the sole spokesperson of Muslims on the subcontinent. And in fact, there's a book which is called The Sole Spokesman, Jinnah.
By Aisha Jalal.
Yeah, it's very well known. And he did not tolerate opponents easily. He wasn't very accommodating of them. And of course, there was no one of his stature who could then communicate in the same way, and his very thorough legalistic mind.
You know, we at the beginning of this section said that what you write is not going to be a hagiography or a qasida. But from your book, I was taken up quite a bit by you. Mr. Anwar Sayyed has collected what you call some of the qualities attributed to him. And he presented this paper in Islamabad in '76. And this is an unbelievable list of qualities: handsome, elegant, eloquent, successful, wealthy, shrewd, prudent, frugal, hardworking, with persevering, tough, grave, disciplined, orderly, competent, organizer, skillful negotiator. It goes on and on. Rational, incorruptible, logical, modernist, constitutionalist, tolerant of honest criticism. This is...
And all this happening in the university where I was teaching at that time.
Okay, so the Quaid-e-Azam. Now you say that Jinnah remains at the center of a tug of war between Pakistan's liberals on one hand and Islamists on the other. Why and what is this tug of war? I mean, here is the man we have described as this perfect English gentleman, and Islamists claim him to be one of their own. How is this?
So he was the perfect English gentleman until 1976 or so.
36.
76.
Oh, you mean in Pakistan he was reinvented. Okay.
He was reinvented at the time of General Ziaul Haq, where suddenly his appearance also changed. He was no longer in those suits that you referred to. He was in fact in Sherwani and with the Jinnah topi on his head, and he became suddenly a very pious man who was who thought of nothing beyond Islam, and his entire personality was modified to suit the exigencies of that time. So General Ziaul Haq wanted now somebody now General Ziaul Haq had a different vision for Pakistan, and so Jinnah had to be changed accordingly. No longer would Pakistan be a Muslim state. Muslim state is where the majority of people are Muslims. Instead, it was to be an Islamic state, and that's what caused a new vision of a new depiction of Jinnah to emerge. One who was conservative, one who had repeatedly asked for Pakistan to be an Islamic state, and so that's the modification of history that happened during that era.
But Dr. Saab, isn't it that even prior to '76, there are things that you quote in your book, writings, which both the liberals and the conservative Muslims, they or from all sort of strata of thought, claim that this is the Jinnah, this is the true Jinnah, this is the, no, this is the real Jinnah. So wasn't he in fact maybe like a perfect politician, saying what the audience wanted to hear at that particular time when he was speaking? So the tug of war in a way is real, not just invented, I thought, by, even though it may be solidified during Ziaul Haq's tenure. But isn't this tug of war real?
It is real because Pakistan was and is not a monolith. There is a small sliver of liberals who would like to claim Jinnah for themselves. They point out that his ways of life were those of modern European man, an Englishman in fact, and that he was imbued with ideas of democracy, of parliamentary democracy, that that his whole political career he had until the very end not emphasized the role of religion. It's only after 1937 that starts happening, and we'll come back to that because that's a very transformative time. On the other hand, since Pakistan was formed on the basis of Muslim identity and on a multiplicity of slogans, therefore one can cherry pick. One can take what one likes about Jinnah and ignore the rest. So now what's happened in Pakistan is that people basically choose the part of Jinnah that they like. And this is made very confusing because he never wrote a definitive a book. He never wrote a book at all. He never wrote a position paper on what he wanted to achieve. Even after the creation of Pakistan, he did not suggest a draft constitution. His statements were all in the form of speeches. Now, speeches are made on the spur of the moment. You look at the audience before you, you look at the context, and so it's different from place to place. Now, you'll ask, isn't this the way all political leaders function? Yes, of course it is. And so, Jinnah should be considered a great political leader. I have absolutely no problem with that.
As a master politician. But even for liberals, I mean, how can they reconcile? They quote his 11th August 1947 speech, you know. But how even they in their minds can reconcile, or how Mr. Jinnah reconciled the two-nation theory, which is so anti-liberal in terms of, if in this defined terms, in the liberalism from Europe, where in fact religion doesn't play a role in the public life. So you have a two-nation theory where religion stands as the defining of a nation, with his August 11th 47 speech that you are free now to go to your temples and to your churches, and it is not a matter for the state of to what religion you belong.
Yes, and this comes after his 1940 address at what is presently the Minar-e-Pakistan, where he says that on this subcontinent there live two and only two nations. They are Hindus and Muslims. They have different heroes, they eat differently, they don't intermarry, and now it's not possible for them to live together in peace. And this was then the basis for Pakistan that propagated onwards, and 7 years later we have partition. Now, once partition takes place, you have this speech of 11th of August, and it's a good question as to why that speech was made. And this is, of course, just 3 days before Pakistan actually comes into existence, or 4 days, whatever. Now, there are a number of reasons for this. The most important one, I think, was that Jinnah now wanted a Pakistan that was governable, that would not have that bloodshed and would give some space to the minorities. I think he genuinely wanted that. He didn't want a flood of Muslims to come from India to Pakistan, which would happen if there was a flood of Hindus going that way. Well, that flood of Hindus did go that way. It was too late now to make amends for having exacerbated the differences between the communities. Now things had come to a point where people were fleeing their homes. So you have the majority of Hindus living in Sindh leaving. Of course, most Muslims chose to stay in India, and they are there even today. But this was to preempt that from happening. It didn't do the job. The second was that this was to reassure the world outside that Pakistan would not be a fundamentalist state run by the mullahs, that it would be a democracy in the sense of a Western democracy, and so the minorities would have a representation. And by the way, at this point, there was no such thing as the Objectives Resolution, which came just a year or so later, from that time, where where for the first time the concept of minority came about. Jinnah didn't have that in mind, and Jinnah, I think, was genuinely indifferent to religion.
But then, if he was different, it seems that the way I'm looking at now your answer and 11th August speech, and you said in a way too little, too late, maybe in another context, but it was, and that he never wrote a book, didn't write a position paper, didn't say definitively that this country would have the following essential principles, or I'd like this country to have the following essential principles on which its constitution should be based. He said nothing of that sort, right? Didn't leave anything. So isn't then, it's not surprising that liberals have very little to really go by, and if you will, everybody else has a lot to go by. And so Pakistan in the last 75 years has been anything but a democratic state with liberal values and an embrace of all the minorities and everything.
Yes. Now, we were talking about Jinnah's evolution.
Okay.
Jinnah, as I said, I believe that he was genuinely indifferent to religion. For one, he was never a very particularly practicing Muslim. He never quoted from the Quran. He didn't know any hadith, or at least none that he ever quoted. When he spoke about Islam, it was all in generalized terms, that those were that it's a perfect religion. We know what democracy is. We know what we know about everything. But he never actually made specific quotes. He didn't know Arabic. He didn't know Urdu. He was not connected with his local culture. To the point that he didn't even speak his own mother tongue, which was Gujarati, and he couldn't communicate with his own sister, Shirin Bai. Okay, now with such a person, you would expect an attitude of indifference towards religion. Yes, it's a very good thing, but it's not for me. And of course,
that was his personal thing. But in the advocacy for the two-nation theory, he was adamant that we, the Muslims, know everything there is to know in a way about governance, about state, about values. It's like just because we are Muslims, we know it all. There was nothing to learn or to imbibe or to educate ourselves with.
Now that attitude came with time. It wasn't there initially. Let's remember that in his earlier years, he was very much an advocate of Hindu-Muslim unity. He was, in fact, called the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity.
Right.
Then he had some, I think, personal problems. He took a deep dislike to Mahatma Gandhi and didn't relish the thought of having to deal with those Hindus who were also educated. Now, let's remember one thing. Jinnah was a star among Muslims because he was so much better educated and articulate. But there were a lot of articulate Hindus, and so he was in competition with them at that point. Okay, but I think that looking at his evolution, it's 1937 that you see a transformation that happens like that. And this is with the defeat of the Muslim League in Muslim majority states of what are now Pakistan, Punjab in particular, where the Muslim League was completely wiped out.
Yeah. I mean, just to give you the statistics, you give only 4% of Muslims voted for the Muslim League in the 1936 or 37
elections.
Just a sliver of the Muslims.
Yes.
They otherwise ignored and voted for Congress.
They voted for Congress, and they voted for the Unionist Party in Punjab. The Unionists were landlords and big businessmen, and it was a mixture of Hindu and Muslim and Sikhs over there. Now that was really galling to Jinnah, and that's when he decided that the earlier position of saying that, well, the Muslim League will be accommodative of everyone and that religion and politics should be separated from each other, that's when he made the decision that now we have to fuse religion with politics. It was a very conscious decision. It is something that he had rejected earlier, but that defeat, that electoral defeat, convinced him, and therefore you will see the speeches that I have quoted of his. He says frankly, outrightly, now religion and politics have to go together.
Seems
now,
like
this is in total contradiction of what he said in his speech of 11th of August 1947.
Yeah. In fact, at least Walpert writes that his falling out from Congress was because Gandhi was introducing the religion in his politics, and Gandhi was, of course, introducing his Hindu philosophy into politics, and Jinnah was taken aback. In fact, even the BJP leader, who was the finance minister who wrote a book on Jinnah, says exactly the same thing, that Jinnah was, in his opinion, a true secularist, and Gandhi was the one who first took the, if you will, the religious brick and threw it in. So it's interesting that then it seems that he was like this great lawyer who is seeing a case that is about to be lost after the 1936 election, and he says, I have to change my strategy.
Yes, he changed the strategy. But, you know, when we talk about Gandhi bringing religion into politics, it's true, but it was in the context of Muslims and Hindus working together to fight against the British and to restore the Khilafat, the Caliphate in Turkey. This is 1924. Okay. Now, what happened then was that with the Ali brothers, the Gandhi is organizing against the British and doing it on a religious issue. I think it was a serious mistake of Gandhi, but then, you know, that's a matter of opinion of what is the right strategy at the right time. But anyway, Jinnah did not like that. However, 1937 comes along, there's a time to change gears now, and that's what he did. Then comes the 1940 address in Lahore, where he says, completely openly, he says, now Hindus and Muslims cannot live together. And that's the time when his popularity starts rising and rising.
We've already touched upon it, Dr. Saab. So, connecting the dots, Jinnah, we might say, was an exceptionally gifted politician and perhaps even a greater lawyer who's going to fight the case. So then one can make an argument that, and connecting what you said, that he was indifferent to kind of introducing or having an Islamist state. He was indifferent to religion at that point in politics. Wasn't his two-nation theory simply an expedient ploy to get Pakistan and to later deal with its consequences, right? What's wrong with that strategy?
Well, what's wrong is, well, it's certainly a very successful strategy, there's no doubt about that. But what's this country that you are fighting for? What's it going to look like? What are going to be its broad outlines? In particular, is this going to be a secular democratic state, or is this going to be a theocratic state? Is it going to be democratic but not secular? What is it? What are the priorities of this new state going to be? So, at the time of the Pakistan movement, there are lots of people who wanted to know that. In fact, in my book, I relate one incident where Jinnah went to Aligarh Muslim University, and he is then asked by students, by a student over there, "Sir, tell us, what is this Pakistan you're making? Is it going to be socialist or is it going to be capitalist? Tell us a little bit about it. And his answer was, anyone who asks that question is an enemy of Pakistan. Because only when we achieve the state, then we can decide on what it is going to be. So he consistently refused to give a blueprint of Pakistan. When the Raja of Mahmudabad asked him exactly this, is this going to be an Islamic state or a secular state? He said, let's decide on this later. Now I'll tell you why he did this. This is very good politics, actually. Because if he had committed to one thing, there would have been opponents of that. If he had committed to another thing, there would have been opponents of that. And so what he wanted was the broadest possible consensus, which is that Muslims are different from Hindus, that they can't live together. Now this had very unfortunate consequences too, because when divisions exist in the country and you exacerbate them, then of course things get very, very unhealthy, and this is then manifested in the form of riots. And then particularly what happened on Direct Action Day, Direct Action Day 1946 was when Pakistan became what they call a slam dunk.
A reality.
That's what the Americans say, right? When you've got the ball just in place.
That's in 1946.
That's 1946.
After Mr. Nehru makes that speech in a way which says, we really don't accept the cabinet mission plan, even though we accept it, but we don't accept it. That's when Mr. Jinnah orders the direct action. And in fact, Abul Kalam Azad writes in his book that that was the big surprise to him. He says Jinnah had never, ever before that moment played populist politics. But at that moment, he said, I never expected him to appeal directly to masses, but he did. And in a way, he is giving him a left-handed, he's giving him a compliment that for his cause, that direct action was what, as you now say, Pakistan became a slam dunk. So interesting that even his opponents recognized that he had played his trump card, so to speak. A little away, I mean, I'll come back to this idea actually that the consequences, I think the idea that yes, we can create a Pakistan because if we take a position, then there will be opponents, right? That's what you're saying. It'll be impossible to achieve the country. But the consequence of that anyway has been the floundering that we have been doing for the last 70, 75 years. And we'll come to the rest of the book, that we have never found a firm footing as to what this nation is, what should we be doing exactly. So we did get the country, and now, of course, we are trying to still try to figure out what kind of a country it's going to be. Now, in your book, you show that Jinnah was not only a master politician, but had a very keen eye for geopolitics, particularly about Pakistan's strategic importance. Now, on what evidence do you say that?
When he was asked, how is Pakistan, and this is after Pakistan comes into existence, when he was asked, what are your resources? You don't have industry, you don't have an educated populace. Where are the resources that are needed for running this country? You're now in the 20th century. And Jinnah's reply to that was, and he gave this reply to the reporter from Life magazine, Margaret
Bourke-White.
And he tells her, look, over there is Russia, communist Russia, and over there is the United States of America. It's a fight between communism versus capitalism and the West. And we are smack in the middle, and we will benefit from this. And he said, he made a statement then which is quite interesting. He said, we are more important to the Americans than anything else. Okay, well, I guess he had a kind of a prescience. He knew what would be coming, and in fact, there was at that time no hint at all that the Soviet Union was going to go
invade
across
Afghanistan or cross the border.
yeah, or anywhere for that matter. The invasion of Hungary came much, much later. But what happened then with Afghanistan, that actually proved that Jinnah was right, that we did have a great amount of geostrategic political importance.
Right.
But unfortunately, there were premises here that were, I think, not good for Pakistan. You know, when we talked a bit earlier about whether Jinnah had a plan for Pakistan, there was one thing that he was very sure about, that this would not be a socialist state. And he abhorred communism and socialism. Well, I guess it's kind of natural because he was a man with 300 7-row suits and a vast empire and no desire to lose that. But he was very articulate on this. He absolutely hated communism and the very concept that this would bring about some forced equality onto people.
So he was, by the way, I'd like to quote what you quote in the book, because here's Margaret Burke White, and you know, this is the quotation you took from the book. Mr. Jinnah says, quote, "America needs Pakistan more than Pakistan needs America." And then he says, she says, Pakistan is the pivot of the world as we are placed. I mean, based on where we are placed, we are the pivot of the world. He revolved his long forefinger in bony circles. And he says, quote again, "The frontier on which the future position of the world revolves." He leaned towards me, dropping his voice to a confidential note. "Russia," confided Mr. Jinnah, "is not so very far away."
Yes. I would say that's brilliant.
Yeah.
But the consequences this has had for Pakistan have been devastating, because our alliance with the West, starting very early on, and then with Ayub Khan coming, that became virtually total, and our taking a side in the Cold War, and our getting the military equipment with which we used to initiate wars, all that ultimately worked out to Pakistan's immense disadvantage. This alliance with the West now has foundered. Now we find that it's another power somewhere. It's China. Now the interesting thing is that here we see the similarity between Iqbal and Jinnah. Neither of them called for education in the sciences, putting your faith in the modern education.
Or in their workforce, in the people.
In the workforce, absolutely. And so the education budget, the first education budget of Pakistan, was pretty much what it is today. Things have stayed...
In real terms, you mean?
No, as a fraction of the GNP.
Fraction, that's right.
Yeah, it's remained pretty much flat. So now compare with Nehru, who thought that India, to progress, must be not only secular, but it must be oriented towards science and modernity, and he invented this term called scientific temper, which must permeate not just scientific institutions and educational institutions, but must permeate society as a whole. And so it is that which will cut through superstitions and traditions and so forth. Jinnah never said that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the danger with just strategic location is not very dissimilar to having, let's say, being a single resource oil producer, which is that money comes easy, because Pakistan, in Pakistan's case, as a rentier state to a superpower, and the leadership of such a country can become lazy and corrupt.
And that is exactly what happened. And now our problem is that the rent has stopped coming in.
That's right.
And our new patron, China, is not willing to step into America's shoes.
Yeah. I mean, we could, if we were far-seeing or leadership was good, we could have used the rental money and invested it in the people. We didn't do that. We invested it in building further elite institutions and in creating an elite based on a rentier elite, so to speak. So, having created a nation state with a strong fusion of religion and politics, is this sustainable?
I think we are finding the consequences of that. For one thing, the emphasis upon religion, upon Islam, which was not so great at Jinnah's time, not so great at the time of Ayub Khan, but then this is something that can be easily hijacked, and that's what was done in Ziaul Haq's time, when it permeated all institutions of the country, and particularly education. And then education in this frame of mind then created what we have today in Pakistan, where now nobody really feels safe from raging religious fanatics, to the point that even the Chinese, who are our closest allies, now just a little while ago, there was a Chinese engineer supervisor who took exception to his workers taking too long a prayer break, and they accused him of blasphemy. He would have been lynched, just like now lynching is a common phenomenon in Pakistan on blasphemy allegations, and his statement that cut your prayer breaks constituted blasphemy in the eyes of those who've been educated into this system. So merging religion with politics may be good for setting up a country, but it's not good
for running it. So in your book, Dr. Saab, you compare Israel and Pakistan. Israel is another country created on the basis of religion. So how would you compare and contrast these two countries?
I think there's a natural similarity between the two. These are two countries that came into existence more or less at the same time, 1947, 1948, and both were created for the respective religious communities, Muslims, Jews. Their founders, however, could not be more different. So, on the one hand, the founder of Israel was Ben Gurion, a socialist, a man who was closely associated with the Histadrut, the labor union. He wanted a modern socialist Israel, and at the beginning, the thought was that Jews and Arabs would have equal rights over there. Well, of course, it couldn't really be, and it never was that way. But that's the sort of thinking that led to a modern, democratic, for Jews, Israel. In the case of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he was, of course, a modern man. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But he despised socialism. I mean, his statements on socialism and communism are unequivocal. He was never close to the common man. In fact, his only contact with them was through his gardener, his cook, his driver, and so forth. But of course, he understood popular Muslim sentiment, and that's, of course, why he was so beloved and given the name Quaid-e-Azam. So that's the difference between the two countries. Now, the important thing is that in Israel, at least in the earlier Israel, and until very recently, I'd say, there was no attempt made to fuse religion with politics. Israel was able to attract Jews from across the world to a secular, modern, scientific Israel, and that's been the power of Israel. That's been the source of its strength. I mean, here is a country with a population that's 10 million, 9 million, I think.
Yeah.
And Karachi is something like 2.5 times that. So you could fit 2.5 Israels into Pakistan.
Correct.
Jinnah never was an advocate of land reform. And he did, after partition, set up this commission, the Sindh Hari Commission, of which Chaudhry Khaliq-ul-Zaman was made the head, and Masood Khadarposh was included in that. But that whole committee was constituted of landlords who were not at all interested in divesting of their lands. And so Masood Khadarposh wrote a dissenting note, sent it to Jinnah, but Jinnah didn't do anything. And I think it was just a token of attempt at land reform. Well, that land reform never happened. It hasn't happened to this day. Those people are there in the assemblies. They make all the important decisions. And if you say that Pakistan is an unjust country today, racked by essentially feudalism, our feudal structure has not changed over time, it's because of the way in which it was formed.
That it was created. Going back to Israel for a second, in a way proves the point that you made earlier, that fusing religion or into politics, even for Israel under Ben Gurion, who was he was secular, democratic, socialist leader, and Zionism is not the Judaism. Zionism is a very special political philosophy, which was very well thought out as to on what basis Israel will function. Unlike Pakistan, where you said Jinnah didn't even leave a position paper, but here is a religion formed differently, but religion has caught up even in Israel, because it is this narrow vision, as you said, democracy only for Jews. So even there now today, Israel has showing great signs of dysfunction in terms of its extremist values. So what to speak of Pakistan, where none of the advantages were available to Pakistan when it came into being that were available to Israel. So you would agree that fusing religion with politics is always a very dangerous mixture.
It's always very dangerous. It's dangerous in Israel, it's dangerous in India, where Hindutva has come up and shown a very disturbing face, and where the minorities, both Muslims and Christians, feel very insecure. As far as Israel goes, well, formally the Arabs have the same rights as Jews, but that's not true. We know it's not. As far as its relationship with the other countries, well, Israel has become the superpower, and an aggressive, nasty superpower, which when it once drops bombs on Syria, on Iraq, on wherever, Lebanon, highly aggressive. And so that's telling us that nationalism can be as dangerous and as nasty a thing as a state based upon religion.
Based on religion. And as far as the feudal or the lack of land reforms is concerned that you were referring to, I mean, our founding fathers, other than of course Mr. Jinnah, a large number of them were basically feudals, number one. That finally they co-opted the Unionist Party and its members based on the fact that they felt more secure in a Pakistan than a united India, where Nehru would be constantly talking of land reforms. So we couldn't go against, I mean, the very deep pockets that were funding the Pakistan movement, or they were the founding fathers of the Pakistan movement. We were like saddled with this thing to retain feudal structure.
Yeah, you could say that that was our inheritance.
That was our inheritance.
Had a left wing in Pakistan developed to the point where it could seriously challenge the feudal order, then maybe our history would have been different. But that didn't happen. Of course, it did happen in Bengal. That was East Pakistan. So East Pakistan, land reform did happen. Sure, there were a few feudals at that time. There was the Nawab of Dhaka, for example. But most of the landlords there were Hindu, the big landlords. And so that's why, in fact, the Muslim League began in Bengal, and that's why the call for Pakistan was loudest
in Bengal.
in East Pakistan. Yeah, what became
Because
East
they were the
Pakistan.
feudals and money lenders to the Muslim populations of Bengal.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's just take a holistic view of the Pakistan's three founding fathers. Given their Herculean efforts spread over a century for our Renaissance and Enlightenment, right? That's what. Why are we still mired in poverty and underdevelopment? Why are we struggling? We are the sick man of South Asia. I mean, Bangladesh has overtaken us by leaps and bounds. India, of course, is another league altogether. Why are we Pakistanis mired in poverty and underdevelopment?
Let's look at the particular historical circumstances. Now, if somebody like Narendra Modi had been there instead of Nehru at the time of partition, I very much doubt that India could have achieved what it did. It was Nehru's secular, strong, scientific leadership, his emphasis upon creating the institutions which then built India up, that owes very much to him. But also the class of Indians who were by and large secular minded, and they did not succumb to the two-nation theory of Govalkar and Savarkar. Now, of course, they have a head start, and maybe they'll be able to fend off the extreme Hindu right wing. Maybe not. Everything is open to the future. As far as Bangladesh, Bangladesh wasn't founded on the principles of religion. It was founded on secular nationalism, on the language issue, on culture, and that then makes them less susceptible to Islamic extremism. Now, if you look at how Pakistan has suffered because of that, I won't go into the 70,000 people that we lost between 2003 and 2014. It was a civil war. More Pakistanis were killed in that than were ever killed in the wars with India. We have had 4, but far fewer in these wars. Now Pakistan has become a country dangerous for Muslims. Isn't that paradoxical that here is a country created for Muslims and yet it is dangerous for Muslims to live in, unless you are Sunni. Of course you have to be Sunni, but even that is not good enough because
they're fighting amongst
themselves. Now look, it's the TTP versus the armed forces of Pakistan and the police and the establishment. And the TTP is what? It's really, they're fighting exactly for what we said we wanted Pakistan for. Some of Jinnah's statements can certainly be interpreted that Pakistan should be a Sharia state. In fact, forget interpretation. Sorry what I said. Jinnah actually made a speech here in Karachi where before the lawyers in 1948 at the Sindh Madrasa, he made the statement, very clear statement, that what's wrong if there is Sharia in Pakistan? Mm-hmm. Now, if you ask, what is the TTP fighting for? They're fighting for 2 things. One is get rid of the Durand line, we don't believe in it. And what is that? That's perfectly consistent with Islam because Islam does not recognize
borders,
geographical borders. Second, they're saying that we want the Sharia. Pakistan is to be a Sharia state. And what's wrong with that? Isn't that what Mr. Jinnah also said? And so, unless we sort out these things, we're going to see bloodshed in the days, in the years, in the decades ahead. What we need now is clarity of thought and
On
that
the
could
nature of state.
on the nature of the state.
Yeah.
We cannot be a peaceful religious state because there ain't no such thing.
Okay, well, on that highly reflective and sort of pensive comment by Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy, we will end our discussion with him on his book on the three founding fathers. And our next episode will talk about the three opponents of Mr. Jinnah who opposed Pakistan. And that will help us compare and contrast what those opponents were doing and why they were doing and opposing Pakistan. So we will come back to you in the next episode. Thank you.